Hey, Home Church, and welcome back. If you recall, a few weeks ago, we talked about a miracle that we described as an unsolicited or involuntary miracle. And that was when Jesus healed a man who had been lame for between 30 and 40 years. Now, you would think that Jesus, being this individual that if nothing else, you would have heard that he could perform miracles and acts that couldn't be explained. You would think that this individual would come walking up to you after you had been unable to walk for so long. And the second Jesus asked you, do you want to be healed? You would have just, blurted out and said, yes, absolutely, I want to be healed. But instead, that's not what we see this individual do. We see this individual actually launch into this story saying how, bad his life has been and how hard it's been. And he never does really say, I want to be healed. It almost makes you wonder if he had just become comfortable with his discomfort. Well, Jesus ends up healing him, but unfortunately what we end up seeing in his life is that rather than seeing this miracle and experiencing the redemptive power of Jesus Christ and then changing his life, he was afraid. He seemed insecure, and we don't know if that was because he just feared the retribution of the Pharisees more than he was, drawn to the person of Jesus Christ or what it was. But regardless, we see him not really opening his eyes. Well, fortunately, it's not what we see in the second involuntary or unsolicited miracle that occurs in the book of John, and that is when Jesus heals a blind man. Now, here in a second, you're going to sit here and read a little bit about this story and what takes place, but I want you to pay attention to how different this story seems than what we learned about several weeks ago with the healing of the lame man. Now, if you weren't around or you don't recall, then don't worry. We'll sit here and put everything on the screen and on the prompts, but what you're going to end up seeing here is a very different attitude, somebody who is willing to take action, who's willing to go out there and who looks at the condition that they're in and doesn't, sit here and have a pity party or say, woe is me, but instead listens to what Christ tells him, follows through with it, and in the end gets to experience the healing that can be achieved through Jesus Christ. Now, as you just read, unlike the situation with the lame man who ended up basically just kind of going on with the rest of his life, not really seeming like he was changed all that much, this individual appears to be changed. He actually took action. Christ said, go down to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. And he did. Not only did he actually get up and do it, but then he came back. So he actually returned back to Jesus Christ after he was healed. It's a very different thing than what we see with the lame man, and this is actually pretty profound, because what it does is it gets to the heart of the issue that our faith without works to follow it up is dead. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, if you think about it, if you were to sit here and say, hey man, I know you're going through a really hard situation, and you know what? My thoughts go out for you. I'm not going to lift a finger to help you, but my thoughts go out to you. Well, I mean, how helpful is that really? But so often, it's exactly what Christians do. That's what society does. And sometimes it's because we feel helpless. If we feel like we don't really know what to do, and that's understandable. But a lot of times, we see hurting around us. We see people that are going through rough situations, and we're too busy to really, get into a conversation with them to hear what's really, holding them down. Or we sit here and we see somebody's in a hard situation, and we think, well, we could help, but, I really, maybe need some of those dollars for myself, or, maybe those clothes I could give to a needy family, I'm saving those because I might have somebody in my family that needs them. We run into these situations all the time, and it shows kind of a disconnect between the things that we say when we get together for church, whether we do it in a traditional church building or whether we do it in a, retail center or whether we do it in a house. We'll say that we want to live like Christ. We'll say that we want to reflect Christ, but does our life really reflect it? Do our works actually back up the faith that we claim to have? The actions of the blind man absolutely backed up his faith. You could just tell through his works that he was somebody who was forever changed, that his eyes had been opened to the very real thing that Christ had done. And how did that happen? Well, the first thing that we end up seeing is that he returned back to Christ. He actually ends up coming back and spending time with Christ, which puts him in a position to get questioned by the Pharisees. Now, this happened to the lame man too, but what happened to the lame man? The lame man that we read back earlier on in John, he ended up basically crumbling, just kind of, trying to report back to the Pharisees whatever they wanted so he wouldn't get in trouble. But the blind man we see actually doing something else. What's one of the other works that we see the blind man do? Well, we see him actually proclaiming who Christ is, what Christ did, and he doesn't fully comprehend, as we read later, exactly who Jesus Christ is, but he knows what happened. He has no problem testifying. And in fact, when somebody argues against him, he actually boldly proclaims just even harder to them what Christ did in his life. And it's just this beautiful picture of an individual who, he wasn't a disciple, so he didn't have all the background. He wasn't classically trained and educated. He didn't have this long history of being a follower of Christ, but yet he knew what Christ had done in his life, and he couldn't help but share it with the authorities and everybody who was around him. The final thing that we see is kind of baked into that a little bit. He rejected what the leaders in the traditional pop culture, religious or otherwise, tried to force him to do. They wanted him to bow down. They wanted him to shut up, to not proclaim what Christ had done, but he was going to push back against that. And when we see the fact that he's willing to proclaim what Christ had done in his life, he's willing to reject the leaders, and he was willing to return and follow Christ, those actions show that he was truly a changed individual. So the question is that if we look at how God has worked in our own lives, do our own works, just as with the blind man, reflect the fact that maybe once upon a time we were blind, but now we can truly see who Christ is? When this story at the very end of the chapter, and I know that this story, unlike some of the others, has been a little bit longer, a few more verses, but there's something so beautiful at the very end of this. And what we see is that after he has been rejected by the Pharisees, after he's been rejected by all the people who are supposed to be the religious authorities and the establishment around him, we see something happen there where Jesus approached him. Jesus sought the blind man out. This individual who had just experienced the redemptive nature of Jesus Christ gets sought out by Jesus. And then that's when Jesus reveals himself to him and says, I'm Jesus. I'm the guy that's the Messiah. That's the one who gave you your sight back. And in that, he draws this beautiful picture of not just returning sight to individuals who are physically blind, but helping us to not be spiritually blind anymore, to be individuals who can see Christ working in our lives, who can see God's glory. You could go on and on, just continuing to unpack all the nuances and little details within this parable, but to me, that last little bit really just capstones the entire thing. Christ approached us. He approached us through the cross. He approached us through the Holy Spirit. And he approaches us through working through individuals that we see every single day, individuals in our daily lives, individuals who are in our church. Christ approaches us in each and every single way. So the only other question that we have to ponder then is that when we sit here and we look at our lives, we look at the things we say, the things we think, and the things that we do our lives demonstrate something that says, I've been changed, my eyes have been opened? Or do we look suspiciously just like everybody else? We're called to live different. It's a hard calling, but it's something that's oh so worth it. Thank you for joining us, and until we can meet again, God bless.